واو من برنامج الشفافية في الأمن والدفاع منظمة الشفافية الدولية.
Sorry, I'll just start by briefly introducing myself. Thank you all so much for being here. أهلا وسهلا وأشكركم لحضوركم هذه المناقشة اليوم. My name is Leo Waro. I work for the Transparency International Defense and Security Program. We're a team of 15 based in London. Fantastic, thank you. Thanks so much. Our aim is to build integrity and reduce corruption in defense and security establishments worldwide and in the global arms trade. We work globally, particularly with chapters of Transparency International around the world, like the Kuwait Transparency Society. I'd like to take the time now just to extend my thanks to the Kuwait Transparency Society for all of their work in organizing this. Today I'm going to tell you a bit about our work and our approach and a new project we're working on, the Government Defense Anti-Corruption Index. I guess the first question to ask is why corruption in defense and security matters. When we ask officials from defense and security establishments, we get three main answers. They tell us that corruption matters to them because it wastes scarce resources, it reduces public trust in them, and it reduces their operational effectiveness. Corruption isn't just an ethical issue, it's also a strategic one. Fundamentally, the defense and security forces exist to protect and defend a nation and its citizens, and when they're weakened by corruption, they can't do that. This slide shows a bit about how the TI Defense and Security Program works. We focus really on practical steps towards greater integrity and transparency in the sector. We've learned over the years that we work best with three main groups. First, with national defense and security establishments. Second, with defense companies. And third, with civil society organizations. All of these groups have an important role to play in building an accountable defense and security establishment. We find that it's key that we engage with defense and security ministries collaboratively and provide support from the inside to reform-minded governments, as well as a bit of pressure from the outside. Once we begin working with defense and security institutions, we find that almost all leaders are eager to address the problem of corruption, even if many have come to see it as an intractable problem. It is often defense officials who approach us rather than the other way around. We also have a lot of interest from civil society organizations who see this sector as a key one in a national anti-corruption strategy. Our approach is very flexible. We want to work with ministries to find the most practical, effective solutions for any given environment. I'm going to speak briefly on two aspects of this slide. The first is facilitating leadership discussion, and the second is research. We have a number of ex-military people working on our team with practical experience in this area. One of the first steps towards building integrity, we find, is making the subject of corruption open to discussion. This is a problem that can be addressed, and we need to reframe it so it seems that way. This slide shows our typology of defense corruption risks. It's an image we've developed over several years to show how we think corruption can occur in this sector and what the key areas of risk are. When most people think about defense corruption, they automatically think about procurement. And you can see from the left-hand side that procurement is indeed a high area of risk. But there are also these other four areas of corruption risk, these purple headings here: political risk, personnel risk, finance risk, and operations risk. And what we've done with this typology is tried to break down each of these issues into manageable areas, so you can see how exactly the problem develops. When it's broken down into these areas, it becomes manageable if challenging issues, and it's a lot easier to see a route forward and to develop a practical plan to address the problems that the national establishment faces. The second aspect of our work I want to highlight today is research, particularly measuring and analyzing the problem of corruption. We are currently working on two indices, the Government Defense Anti-Corruption Index and the Defense Companies Anti-Corruption Index. I'll focus today on the Government Index, which Kuwait is included in, but if you're interested in learning more about our work with companies and an upcoming index measuring corruption risk in defense companies worldwide, do let me know. My colleague who works with me on the government index used to work in the financial sector in London, and he said that they had a motto that what gets measured gets done. And I think that that applies here too. In order to tackle a problem, you need to know just what the problem is, and then you can start to think of how you can tackle it. So the Government Defense Anti-Corruption Index is a global index to measure levels of corruption risk in national defense establishments worldwide. It came about because defense officials kept on asking us two key questions. How do we know if we're improving? And how do we compare to other countries in our region? We mean for this index to be a benchmarking tool for governments and an advocacy tool to prompt reform. We're looking at 83 countries in total. It's notoriously challenging to measure corruption itself, so we decided instead of trying to measure corruption on a case-by-case basis, we'll look at corruption risk. What systems and mechanisms are in place to protect against corruption in the sector, and are they enforced? We began by developing a questionnaire that could be used in countries around the world, and based our questions on the typology that I showed you before. So each country will be placed on a band from A to F, A being the best. But in addition, they'll also get scores on each of the 5 integrity areas of personnel, procurement, financial, operational, and political risk. So it gives a little bit more nuance than a simple, just a number by itself or a score by itself. In each country, we hired an independent assessor or used the TI National Chapter expertise to complete the questionnaire. For each question, they provided a score and also a narrative response based on that justified the score. And they also listed any sources that they used. The next step was to invite governments to participate. We invited defense ministries to give them the chance to complete the review, similar to a peer review, and give their input into the problem and their perspective. In several cases, governments did so, and the information they provided was really useful. If they challenged scores or provided a lot of additional information, we sent the assessment back to the original researcher. So it created an interesting dialogue between an academic or a civil society person and the government. It was a really interesting back and forth, and all of that information will be published in country scorecards online. This slide shows an example of one of the questions. In order to provide the most useful tool, not just putting a number on it, but actually providing in-depth data, we wanted to consider both what laws and regulations are in place and whether they're enforced. The result is not just a score, but a more nuanced consideration of each country's areas of strength and weakness. So these are the countries that are included. If you need this later, I'm happy to show you. So now that we've developed it, we're starting to think more about how it can be used. We envision this index as a tool that governments can use to strengthen their anti-corruption standards in defense and security. We suggest that governments start by doing a further, more internal analysis of their MOD or MOI. The index is a great starting point to decide what areas to begin with, and an internal discussion with perhaps interviews internally is a way to take it forward. This analysis can then be used to develop an action plan against corruption in this sector. TIDSP has done this with several other countries in the past. The reform process might include things like putting in place new regulations or enforcing already existing ones. It could also include training and education for leaders. The Transparency International Defense Team has a 5-day building integrity course that we've given in 60 countries around the world. And my colleague Hugh Edelston will be speaking about that in a bit more detail tomorrow. We believe that corruption is a problem that can be tackled, and a clear process and plan for doing so is really key to that. One strong step that can be taken is to develop a team within the ministry that is dedicated to building integrity and countering corruption. This is a real indicator and demonstrates that leadership is serious about dealing with these issues. Beyond the work of individual ministries, we hope that this index will also prompt further research. While these indices are new, research has always been a major component of the Transparency International Defense Team's work. In the past couple of years, our reports have included a handbook for defense officials with 20 practical reform suggestions. We've got a few copies of that here. A report measuring defense budget transparency, reports on offset contracts and procurement, auditing, and military-owned businesses. We also have done several case study reports, including of Colombia. Another report we've done is on codes of conduct and standards in ministries of defense and security. I wanted to talk about this for one reason, because we've recently translated our codes of conduct report into Arabic, and that's available here. It's also an example of a narrower subject, which, when it's done well, can really make a difference towards building integrity in a ministry. Doctrine for the military and clear codes of conduct and standards for personnel can help guide ethical behavior. In our report, we did a multi-country study that looked at 34 countries' codes of conduct to see what they have in place and assess the quality of that code. Generally, we found that there were a lot of compliance-based regimes with thick, heavy legal language that would be difficult for an average user to understand. It shouldn't just reinstate the law, it should also provide guidance on what to do. What should a soldier do if he's offered a bribe? Is it okay to accept a gift from a defense contractor? How about tickets to a sports match or a working lunch? Two particularly bad areas are conflicts of interest and post-separation employment. We find that most governments just don't provide enough guidance to their personnel on how these corruption risks can be avoided. On conflicts of interest, we believe that officials should be prohibited from working in cases where close relationships or family ties raise doubts about their impartiality. We believe they should be prohibited from having financial interest in companies related to their work in the ministry. And most importantly, we think that there should be a clear way to resolve this in a process through the chain of command. The revolving door is also an issue that needs to be taken into consideration between defense ministries and the private sector, as Sabra Swedon mentioned. Overall, clear and usable codes of conduct are vital and practical tools to guide personnel's behavior and prevent impropriety. So just to summarize, defense corruption is a major problem everywhere, and it's a complex one, as that typology slide shows you. There are a lot of issues involved. But this is also a problem that can be addressed. We at TIDSP welcome engagement from defense and security ministries around the world, civil society organizations, and defense companies to work to build integrity and protect against corruption in this sector. I'd welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Mr. Arnold Lothholt from من مركز جنيف للرقابة الديمقراطية على القوات المسلحة، مدير برنامج الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا، فليتفضل.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is a great pleasure for me to be back in Kuwait after several years. And I would like to thank the organizers, Kuwait Transparency Society, for giving me this opportunity to stand here today in front of you in a country which I love, in which I have many friends, and in which I have spent very nice days and some very difficult days, which have been difficult for all of you. And I think Kuwait, more than any country in the region, knows what it means to suffer the consequences of an intransparent defense and security sector. Today I work in a different function. I am the director for the Middle East at an international organization based in Geneva, which groups together 61 member states. And these 61 member states have one objective in common. They promote transparency and accountability in defense and security. So the question is not to tell others how to do it, but it is actually to offer and share with others how democracies manage a sector which normally is not so transparent. And I would like to place my brief intervention in the larger context of the coming into existence of my organization and try to show why actually transparency is so much of interest to many states. There was a good advice I got once from a Swiss politician. He said, if you don't know how to start a conference, then say the world has changed. It's never wrong. It has a lot of acceptance. General Swedani has been referring to the change that has occurred in Kuwait as a result of the invasion into Kuwait. And we have seen in the Arab region a lot of change recently, change in the Arab street, and in an incredible speed, regimes have left their place to others. And not at least for a lot of problems in the security sector. People were dissatisfied with the level of service they got from governments when it came to security. They were dissatisfied with the levels of freedom and human rights. They complained about the lack of dignity and mostly a lack of transparency and accountability. But when we complain about transparency and accountability, what precisely do we mean? Is it just the problem with corruption in defense procurement? Or is it much wider? I would like to take this point of view that it is a much wider issue. It is providing a window through which one can look into two things: what the government does and how it does it, and what the government spends. So the first one is the policy accountability, and the second one is the financial accountability. And we should not focus only on financial accountability, because the second one cannot exist without the first one. And there are degrees of transparency. You see here two windows. One allows the light to come through. Something can be understood as going on, but you don't get the clear picture. And the question is, how clear should the picture be for us to say that we have transparency? Of course, it is linked to the transparency culture. Not everybody would like to open up everything, but nevertheless, we speak of transparency once we get a pretty good sense